Well, I'm sitting here with great pleasure, I have to say, with one of Pakistan's most celebrated politicians, and she's certainly one of the bravest, Senator Sherry Rehman. She's a powerful voice. She's a powerful voice for moderate and liberal values at a time when espousing such views is increasingly important and also dangerous. Now, Sherry, you're known in Pakistan for your fierce defense of free speech and moderate values, and while your colleagues are repeatedly gunned down. What's prompted you to take such risks when you know that it could be you next?
First off, let me congratulate you on an outstanding event. I just saw the outgoing panel and I'm humbled by their lives and their stories, so I feel mine pale in comparison. Now, what makes me do things like this? Just in the green room, we're talking about it, how any kind of privilege, and I was born with the privilege of an education, not very much more. Any kind of privilege in South Asia really really brings upon us the responsibility to do whatever we can, whatever choices we can make, whatever opportunities come our way, use them. Use them for those who are more vulnerable than any of us, who have no choices, who don't know about their rights, and who don't know how to appropriate that little bit of power that can just change their life little by little. So, here's to big things, but also I want to say people should never, never stand back from the power of the increment, the daily chip, chip, chip away at whatever you want to make happen. And these women are doing that. They're making big things happen, but also the daily chip away.
Well, one of the things you're chipping away at is the relationship, of course, between India and Pakistan, and you're here, and that's quite a lot of chipping. You founded the Jinnah Institute, which actually exists to establish a space for moderate voices in that dialogue. Where do you see relations right now between the two countries?
I'd love to say they were off to a new icebreaker at some point, and we keep looking for that. But there's a neuralgia in this relationship. There's a pathology that we need to break out of. And really, the only way, this is a big chip, this is a huge boulder. And we need to work on this because when our states don't, when they don't do this well, then what do you do? The people of both countries have to take back their agency, have to say, well, we're making policy, and that's the power of democracy. So I think the whole point of people talking to each other is just that. I remember saying this in America some time ago, that the future of foreign policy lies with societies. And what are societies? People like you and me, and public conversations.
Yeah. Well, obviously, the Mumbai attacks were a watershed moment in the Pakistan-Indian relations. And how do we now dial back that hostility between the two countries? Because one thing you said to me the other day, which really stuck in my mind, is that the third generation after partition don't have the same memories and don't have the same relationships. That actually, at least until now, there had been relatives, but now there have been a whole generation who've been raised without that connection.
Without the romance of living in each other's countries, or their parents or their grandparents. So I think that we can look at the positives here. This generation won't bring the baggage and trauma of what went on in that. It was the greatest movement of people from one country to another. It was traumatic, I'm told. And Generation 3.0, or South Asia, can make change happen by connecting with each other, letting go of the baggage of the past, but using history to chart a better course, to understand that we can't change our geography. For God's sake, we can't be the T-Rexes of the world. South Asia right now is in a place, is the Jurassic Park of the globe. Really, I'm just making this up as I go along. And it is the Jurassic
Keep
Park.
Keep going. I'm trying to think dinosaurs.
Because we are, what age are we living in? The whole world has moved on. They first created boundaries, now they're dismantling the boundaries. I mean, we're not Great Britain or the United States, big islands. We are connected to each other. And we're not just connected by our stories or our histories of pain and love and desire. We're connected by geography that we cannot change. People have to get this. And so, what do? When you try to optimize a situation, you work with what you have. All right? So, we are neighbors. And while we can't instantly love each other, love thy neighbor, we can at least dial back the hate. And the first step is keeping talking. It gets very frustrating. We get dialogue fatigue, the same serpent eating its tail, the same conversation privately, publicly, the same stakeholders, but you have to keep at it. It's like Sisyphus moving that boulder up every day, falls down, he does it again.
Well, one thing I want to ask you about is if public sentiment in Pakistan is really turned regarding the Taliban since the gunning of the school children, really nearly a year ago now, is it really changing? Is it finally beginning to be absolutely a pariah thing to be involved
Well,
in these acts?
it should be a pariah thing to rape a woman. It should be a pariah thing to be. People should be made lepers for all kinds of crimes. I wish it was more of a pariah thing, as you put it. And right now, I'm happy to say at least that it's sad that it took that Peshawar tragedy. It was horrible, traumatic, gruesome. But there have been many such episodes, and when I was in government, we tried very hard to turn that worm. And I think we're at an epical moment, not just in our history, but the history of the world. Pakistanis are very united against terrorists. That is more than a leper thing now. But I want to use the opportunity to say to this empowered audience that you've got to be empowered to get here. Let's face it. And remember that this is a dangerous world. It is not the world I grew up in. My daughter is growing up in a very different world, and so will yours, your sons, your daughters. It's a dangerous world, and our challenges are connected. We can't sort our problems together. And we're going to have to focus on finding common ground. And after Paris, honestly, the global leadership, and we all should put our shoulder to this wheel, have to be clear. We have to identify a common enemy. I've done it, you've done it. I'm sure this room's done it, Pakistan's done it, India's done it, but I don't think the whole world has quite done it or understood the dangers coming their way. It's like a freight train coming your way, and it's like a nightmare, and you can't stop it. This is what Benazir Bhutto used to say to me, and she said, it's like a nightmare. Terrorism is a nightmare. We haven't really worked hard to protect ourselves from and to disable and degrade and destroy. Those are three different words. We'll have to understand that the destroy part of it is a very, very long haul, and we're going to have to stick to that haul. But if we divide ourselves, the polarities will only make them stronger.
Well, you mentioned Benazir Bhutto, of course, who was both your friend as well as your colleague.
My mentor.
In every way, and your mentor in every way. You were riding in a car with her when the car was attacked, in a terrorist attack. And then, of course, a couple of weeks later, you were a couple of cars behind her when she was
right behind her.
You were right behind her when she was assassinated. Talk to me about that devastating period.
It's still hard to talk about that night and those whole times. I remember we were on an election campaign, and we came into government even after she died. And she said in that last public rally of hers, they're called jalsas in South Asia, and she said, and I'm going to switch to Urdu, she says, she identified the terrorists who had overtaken some of our territory, which is a beautiful area called Swat, and she said, the flag of Pakistan has been removed from Swat. मैं बचाऊंगी, आप बचाएंगे, हम बचाएंगे. And she called them out. She died that day and went down to the bullet of a terrorist. So my story really is, I want to live my life the way I want to die it. Serving my country, but with my comfortable pumps on.
Well,
as she did. And she taught us that.
Well, I actually saw Benazir at a conference 2 or 3 weeks before she died, and she was well aware of the danger she faced going back to Iran, well aware of it. And she talked about the people who had urged her to come back. Were you one of the voices that urged her to come back?
I did urge her to come back, and she was very real about the danger facing her. She had no illusion. And after that first attack, the night she came back was, I remember, October 18, 2007. We were inching up. There was a multitude, a sea of people we hadn't counted on. I mean, we really were expecting her to go by a timeline, reach a certain, we never reached. And so we got blown up just along the way. And the next day we said, all right now. And she hadn't been to her home for I don't know how many years. And that night, I remember in the vehicle, she's like, Sherry, should we go to your house or should we go to mine? We don't know what awaits, awaited her at her home, Bilawal house. What awaits? I said, I don't know. Probably the same awaits us at my house. And we can't use our phones because they would triangulate where we're leaving. I couldn't tell my husband that I'm safe. It must have been agony for him. So thank you for living through fragile and dangerous times. He's here tonight. She knew. And the next day we said, all right, we now have to sit down and do a really cold, clear-eyed reassessment of how we're going to put you in this election campaign. She said, listen, come on, guys. I didn't come here to sit in my living room. And there were many of us who were like, okay, you have to be, many had altercations about her safety because we'd seen, we had clarity on what the intention of the terrorists was. But she wanted to campaign the way she wanted to touch everybody's hands. She wanted to be with the people. And that's fair, and I understand that. That's a risk she took. But she went into it with her eyes open. Now that's leadership.
Sure is.
Yeah.
What an extraordinary woman. Very, very tragic. Of course, a lot of people after that incident, though, tragedy, would have thought, this is enough. This is just, I have to get out of the public sphere and not
That
take
would
a
be
risk
fair,
like that.
yeah.
But in 2010, you put your life at risk again with a bill seeking to reform Pakistan's blasphemy laws after a Christian mother was sentenced to death. Even though your colleague and friend, the Punjab governor Salman Taseer, was murdered for taking the same position, you didn't get that bill through. What keeps you optimistic when you're continually faced with such intransigent conservative elements?
I'll tell you what, change doesn't happen overnight. 4 steps forward, 2 backwards, very often. Number one, why I speak about the power of the increment, it allows me to stand at the gateway of hope as opposed to hatred and fear. I'm not valorizing myself. I'm not saying that fear doesn't sort of overshadow my life. It does. I'm human. But there's a difference between fear and courage, and one has to draw that line, or being foolish. And so many bills, so many laws that I thought we would never be able to make happen. I mean, I've done a lot of legislation on media as well as women. Some of the women's bills were very hard to push through because the resistance came from all sides. And it was funny to watch because it was people you think would stand up and be counted, but when it comes to the club getting together, the club gets together. So what do? You sort of lobby with the media, you lobby with women's groups, civil society. And in those days, Benazir Bhutto was alive when I moved all those women's bills. They were tough. And I would call her. I said, well, the party needs to fall into. Well, the party is falling into line. Others need to fall. You need critical mass in parliament, especially if you're not in government. And so we continued that journey. Some bills originated, 7, 8 years ago. They saw reversals. We're still talking about forced conversions. My province of Sindh, where I'm from, is putting that in, so you can't forcibly convert somebody's religion. That happens. It happens in all our countries. Sexual harassment, I'm proud of that. That's a landmark law. And the domestic violence bill is something that is still in our system, and I'm hoping that it goes through the Senate very soon.
It's extraordinary what you've done, the amount that you've got through, actually, given what you're up against. And of course, you wrote an anti-honor killing bill in
That's
Pakistan.
right.
And yet honor killings still continue to happen. I mean, in
See,
fact,
the
we
way
have in our
that
audience
happened, yeah.
Shameen Obaid
Yeah,
Chinoy,
yeah,
who's
yeah.
made an incredible documentary
Movie about
called A Girl in the River, which is about a young girl from the Punjab who is shot by her father and her uncle because of an elopement that they didn't approve of. she ends up, they throw her into a river in a burlap sack, and she struggles free.
Horrific.
And what is so awful about it is, even though she has the incredible courage to prosecute, in the end, she's made to forgive her aggressors, because actually she can't really fight the cultural pressure, and her life would have been a misery if she continued. So that's the horrible thing about how do you make law prevail over custom?
See, we started with the law, it was called Karo Kari in Pakistan, the anti-honor killings bill, and that was very watered down. Unlike the other four, I was not happy with that, and again, it was very watered down. So it's coming back. It's in a cycle where we should be able, in a few months from now, I'm hoping, and it's back at the Senate, where of Pakistan, which is our upper house, where this power to forgive, or what I call privatizing justice by jirgas, by assemblies of men who get together, and women. I mean, women collaborate in each other's suppression too. Let's not, shy away from saying that. They do. They collaborate in oppression in layers of ways. So one has to protect those who are seeking to, who are able to give voice to their need for a life as they choose. And so the forgiving bit is going through another iteration, and I'm sure we can make it happen.
Well, it's incredible. In Pakistan, you have a quota system, of course, and which has brought many women into positions of power.
Including myself?
How has that made a difference to the kind of legislation that's coming up?
Yes, I want to say, and I would urge sisters here whom we've, talked about. We've had discussions with Indian women over this issue, and it's contested space. I mean, does it empower women? Does it bring in tokens, relatives? Well, I mean, we've used this quota in Parliament with great effect. It's humanized the nature of national discourse, let alone parliamentary discourse. And 21% of the women, we have 20% in both our big federal houses, are able to, from non-treasury benches, non-government benches, bring 78% of the House business, which means all instruments of accountability, legislation, rules of conduct, everything. So women, despite not even being literate in lawmaking or having all come through the general election, many still come through the general election, many are able to make that transition. They've changed the nature of the discourse in Parliament, outside Parliament, triangulated with media. So I think it's a big, huge success. It's worth doing. It's not enough to say, well, we'll reserve a quota in the parties. What do women get? They get the slum seats, not the winning seats then. Yes, of course. So the decision making is like that in parties. Oh, we'll give you, that's a hard seat to win. So, I mean, we have to, affirmative action is so important, and that's another bill I moved. 10% of women have to be employed we have a huge public sector, so do you. So they have to be employed there, they have to qualify for it. The merit has to, there's clear metrics for qualifying. But here we are. I mean, I was not related to Benazir Bhutto or anything. She scouted me out. I didn't want to be in politics. But she scouted a lot of bright, young, talented women.
Yeah, in fact, you yourself are now trying to pay it forward, obviously, because you've got this new initiative for young Pakistani women. Talk to me just a little about that before we close.
It's called Empowerment 101, Unrolling the Ladder, which means I'm going to mentor young women who come out of school and graduate, basically colleges, and are seeking to go into the job market or not. Well, I'll be talking to them about why they're not going into the mainstream, how to use their education, and how to actualize the rights that they know about. Because, Tina, as you know, a great deal of decision-making and disempowerment takes place in the home. The public and the political has to be one very often. And that's what I do speak to young women about, that you must not be intimidated by the circle of intimidation at home. It's very, very casual, and sometimes it's very, very insidious. But women find power outside the home, usually despite the home, not because of it, as you've seen so many stories. And women who are educated, lawyers, barristers, I'm amazed at how they have an inhibition about, actually, it's the community. What will people think of me if I sue for divorce? What will people think of me if I actually ask for a pay raise? I mean, it's a little pushy. You have to do this. If you don't ask, you don't get, and that's my main
But
message.
you also need a great spouse, and you have one, right?
I
in
have
Nadine.
the best husband in the world, sitting right here.
So is he, when you take these great risks, does he partner with you in those decisions?
He absolutely does, and I was a little, double-minded. I had a great life being a journalist. As you know, you sit on a perch, and your voice is authentic, and you're able to say what you want. And today's journalism, you cast judgment where you like. No one questions you. At least in Pakistan,
She's got that dig in. She was wanting
it's
to do
Fox on steroids, guys, on TV half the
Okay,
time.
all right.
Here too. And so I said, well, why would I want to do this? I don't have a feudal background. I have no one who'll ever look after a constituency. He still doesn't. I'm working on it. So he says, well, no. And we were living in another country. It's been, 16 years since we've been married. We're still working on living in the same country the whole week. And he supports it. That's why he's traveling with me whenever I go out on a weekend.
Well, I always like to end on cheering a great guy, so that's a great place to stop.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.